Hello and welcome to Just One More Watch. In the watch industry, as with any other industry, if you're looking to progress a brand or a model from within that brand's range, you're always faced with broadly the same two options: evolution or revolution. Some brands, usually the ones in dire straits, try the latter. Think Bremont's recent disastrous attempt to reinvent themselves. Most brands prefer the former, gradually refining their brand and their brand's products over many generations, taking the best elements of one iteration and improving them for the next. And that is exactly what Melbourne's second hour watches have done with their most successful model, the Mandala. I first reviewed the Mark I Mandala exactly 4 years ago and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Today is my review of the Mark III Mandala, and I'm pleased to say that they have indeed evolved the design language, the features and the functions of the watch to take what was already a very solid offering and turn it into a bit of an Aussie classic. A well-spec'd watch with an original design that can hold its own against any other micro on the market today, in my humble opinion. Now, just because I just used the word classic does not mean this is a complaint-free review, though you know that's unlikely. I do have kind of 3 or 4 moans and 2 niggles, so make sure you stick around for those. But overall, the Mark III has impressed me just as much as the Mark I did back in 2021. Now, you saw the pop-up? This video is sponsored by Second Hour Watches. I will therefore, of course, leave a link to the listing for the Mandala Mark III on their website in the description of the video. They sent me 2 different colour versions, 2 different production units to have a play around with today. They are shipping these this month, so no long wait, you get your watch imminently. And let's start by looking at the packaging. Peter Sargis, the brand owner, has a thing for what he calls sacred geometry, and you can see that coming into effect even with the packaging. Not with the outer box, that's a fairly conventional rectangle, but the inner case with all of those little cutouts with the logo in the centre, foreshadowing some of what is found within the case. And what is found within the case is a rather attractive, now I would call this a dressy style sports watch. The 2 colours I have are this mint green and what they refer to as a bumblebee yellow, but it's probably worth having a look at all the other colour versions at this point. There is a fairly conventional black, what they call a bullseye blue, with 2 shades of blue, darker on the outside, lighter on the inside. There's a silver blue, the mint that you just saw, bullseye red, which was a very popular colour on their giant stride diver from a few years back, salmon, which was the killer colour on the Mark I Mandala, and bumblebee, the second colour that they sent me. I gotta say though, it's not a massively bright shade of yellow, it is quite muted, more on that later. In terms of dimensions and specifications, most of these are unchanged from the originals, with one notable exception. It's a 40-20, so 40mm in diameter with 20mm between the lugs, thickness of bang on 11mm, and a lug to lug of bang on 46mm. The bracelet has a 2mm taper, so down to 18 and back up to 20.5mm at the clasp. By the way, as sized for my 7-inch wrist, this one weighs in at 150 grams. Now that is actually 30 grams heavier than the previous model. It weighed in at, oddly enough, 120 grams. And I think I know where the extra weight is. Stay tuned. Crystal is bevel edge flat sapphire with AR undercoating. Water resistance is 100 meters with the aid of a screw down crown, and the movement is a Miyota 9015 with a nice custom rotor, once again exhibiting some of that sacred geometry. We all know this movement by now, I'm sure, don't we? 24 jewels, hacking and hand winding, Japanese made automatic, nice little bit of decoration, nice and slim as well, hence why they can hit 11mm on the nose for this one. They do, however, only wind in one direction, so you always get a little bit of spin and a little bit of wobble with these. Now, I think the custom caseback and the custom rotor means this one is noisier than most 9000 series. It's been noisier than most other watches with the same movement that I have reviewed. Some people enjoy hearing their watch as well as seeing their watch. Some people don't. There you go, you do with that information what you will. Case finish is very nice indeed, and there is one specification that I didn't talk about already, and that's a 1200 Vickers hardness coating on the case and the bracelet, so the case finish should stay very nice indeed for far, far longer than it otherwise might have. Now, the bezel has changed slightly from previous models. It is all polish. There's no brushing on the bezel anymore, but the case is brushed, at least on the flanks and on the upper lug surfaces. There's a really nice chamfer running from either lug tip to lug tip or lug tip to crown guard. This one also has a high polish undercut for comfort, and I'm sure you saw the case back is also high polish, again for comfort. It's a 5.8mm crown nestled in between some really neat little crown guards. Kind of unusual for this style of watch, but again, not only do they protect the crown, there's a clue in the name, but they also help with comfort. Talking of which, it is a good bracelet on this one. It has changed from a 9-link to a 7-link, and I think it's put on a bit of weight over the last 4 years. Sadly, it's not alone in that regard. It certainly feels more substantive than before, and as discussed, I think the watch has put on about 30 grams, most of it I suspect coming from this new bracelet and clasp combo. It is very nice though. It's a mix of satin brushing and high polish. It's 7 separate pieces of metal, although they are not individually articulated, if you see what I mean. They act like single links. Female end links, by the way, so there's an immediate drop from the case, so this one wears as the dimensions would suggest that it would. And it's a new clasp since I last looked at the Mandala, now one of the standard, in inverted commas, adjustables, double trigger, very nicely machined throughout. 5 positions of adjustment across just over a centimetre. But they are long links, so you are probably going to need that versatility. But enough of all this. This one is all about the dial, so let's have a look at it. Actually, let's have a look at the old one first. I think that'll be quite instructive to see what they've done, to see the differences between the versions. Now, the original Mandala had the 3 prominent indices at 12, 4 and 8, but they were partially cantilevered. They protruded from the outer section of the dial and hung over the inner section of the dial. The rehaut was quite steep with printed Arabics around the flat outer edge and printed minute markers on the steep angled section. The guilloche moulding, the highlight of the dial, was on an inner circle framed by a flat unpatterned brushed outer circle. Alright, have you taken all of that in then? Let's get back to the new watch. And as discussed, it's clearly an evolution of the old watch. I think every change that has been made has been a real step forward. Have a look at the rehaut, for example. It's now much smoother, much softer, much less aggressive than the original, with a gentle slope towards the dial rather than a step and a steep angle. Similarly, the 3 main indices, which sit partially within that rehaut, are one piece. They are no longer cantilevered, meaning they look far less awkward than on the previous version. And the guilloche moulding, the highlight of the watch, has now extended to the point where it meets the chapter ring. 3 small but significant changes that take the best of the Mark I and just refine it really nicely. One other significant change is the addition of a date complication at the 6. These are all date only. There currently isn't a no date option, but it is nicely framed and therefore nicely integrated into the dial, and the colour matching of the date wheel certainly helps with that. The handset are pretty much carried over. They're high polished silver, there's a bevel down the middle, and those twin prong tips to the hour hand and the minute hand rather remind this Star Wars tragic of the wings of a TIE fighter. And it's a nice slender diamond tipped second hand as well. Overall, good job second hour. You've taken a watch that already had a clear identity and a completely original look, and you've just refined that look even further over the years. Now, a true all-rounder needs decent loom, and I'm pleased to tell you that the Mandala Mark III has decent loom. BGW9 on the hands and the indices, and I mean, those indices are big enough, aren't they? Surely they should be fairly legible after dark, and they perform pretty well right across my standard test period. On wrist, everything wears as you would expect, although as discussed, the weight does add a bit of chunk. It definitely feels more solid on wrist than its predecessor. If you've got a bigger wrist and you're a bigger person, you're well catered for here. There were heaps of spare links. You're probably going to enjoy that extra weight. If you are a smaller person with a smaller wrist, then maybe you'd have preferred the on-wrist feel of its predecessor. Legibility, as always, will vary depending on the colour. Even with that angled rehaut, the main pattern dial surface is a reasonable size though, and the hands aren't too bad either. Of the two that I was sent, my money is on the yellow one actually being more legible than the minty one. And finally, let's chuck in a bit of outdoor footage and some pocket shots so you can see what each of the two dials looks like in natural light. The central patterning, the guilloche, is by no means overdone. Arguably it's more subtle in this generation than in previous versions. It is really nice though. Oftentimes, guilloche can be used in a slightly traditional, old-fashioned sense, but I think here Peter has made something much more modern, much more contemporary. The indices, the dark rehaut, etc., all ensure that there's more going on than just the patterning. The patterning isn't trying to carry the watch off all by itself, if you see what I mean. I think they sold quite a few of these over the last few years, and with good reason. It's a really solid, well-designed watch. However, moans and niggles. Like I said, I do have a couple of niggles and two moans. As mentioned earlier on, it's a little bit noisy, noisier than just about any other 9000 series powered watch that I can remember. I suspect the combination of heavy rotor and display case back are both the reasons for that. My second niggle is a carryover from my first encounter, the crown. I don't really think the crown fits in all that well with the watch. It's kind of cross-hatched like the crown from a diver, a Seiko Samurai or something. As such, it offers plenty of grip, but it's a little rough to the touch, a little too rough then for the watch overall. I am not suggesting that all brands must listen to and fix my personal complaint list, but if they don't, then I have to complain about it again for consistency, don't I? Third niggle is there's no no-date option. The original Mandala that I looked at 4 years ago was only a no-date, so I guess the market dictated over the years that the date option was preferable. But a no-date option would have been appreciated with this dial, I think, because it's so focused on that sacred geometry. What are my two moans then? Well, the first is something that I moaned about the last time I reviewed a second hour when I looked at the memoir earlier last year. There's a bit of colour disparity between some of the shots used on their website and the renders. The photo of this Bumblebee version is not necessarily representative therefore. It's not a particularly bright yellow, it is far more muted like the render. So if you are keen on one of these, try and watch as many videos as possible, have a look on Instagram, etc. for owner shots of the watch in a variety of light conditions, and make sure that you know what you're ordering, that you're getting the colour that you think you're getting, because there is a bit of a discrepancy, as I said. My second moan is when I looked at the Mark I, it was $420. This one is now $580. Now, I understand that both exchange rates and inflation affect prices, particularly as Peter prices his watches in Aussie dollars first and then all currencies second, but that's a 30% price hike over the original model. I guess things like an improvement in the hardness coating, improvement in the bracelet and clasp, etc. obviously have costs, but the more you spend on a watch, the more you're going to have to think about it before you spend on a watch. You're going to have to be sure that you're going to wear it. So I guess you have to be 30% more convinced by this one than you did with the original, if you see what I mean. It doesn't change the bottom line of this review though, even at the new price. I still highly recommend the Mandala. I think it's a really interesting and original design, and with this Mark III, the brand has taken the design, I think anyway, in the right direction. The spirit of the original is still evident, if you will, but the whole thing is more refined. The dial flows better. There's more guilloche patterning, there are less steps to it, the indices are more refined, and of course there are a number of quality of life upgrades with the bracelet, quick release end links, etc, etc. So do your research, choose your colour carefully, and enjoy one of Australia's finest contemporary timepieces. So there you have it. I really like this one, but if you don't, check out a couple of their other offerings here or here. Thanks for watching this one. I will see you again in the next one.